In this video, we are going to see some of the Mulesoft interview question. The first one is, what is API Manager? So API Manager is the one available in our Anypoint platform, which we can use it to govern or manage and secure API. So what we will do is we log into our Anypoint platform, and once we log in, we have many components, and one of the components is API Manager. In that, we can go to manage API and we can create a API, and then we can create a policy to enforce and govern that API, and also we can secure the API. Because in the policies, you have many policies like IP whitelisting, and you have rate limiting policy, and you have a throttling, some policies are there. So some of the policies we can apply in order to secure our API. So that is what this API Manager will do. Where this API Manager is available, it is available in your Anypoint platform. So if you look at the URL, right, it's available in anypoint.mulesoft.com, which is our control plane. Inside that, we have Anypoint API Manager component. Using that, we can manage and we can govern and secure our APIs. I'll move on to the next page. What is Runtime Manager? Again, this is also available inside our Anypoint platform, and it's also called as Anypoint Runtime Manager. Is an interface to Anypoint platform that provides a unified view of your application, servers, and API. If you look at this screenshot, this is a Runtime Manager screenshot. You can have a single view. You can have a unified view for all your application. For example, here, this is my Anypoint platform where I have only 2 integration available, which is already deployed. You can see list of API deployed or list of Mule application deployed from here. And you can see and you can manage your applications as well. You can start your application, you can stop your application, and you can go inside your application and see the health check of the application and the utilization of that application, and you can see the logs of the application. So you can manage everything from this Runtime Manager. And with Runtime Manager, you can deploy and manage and monitor your Mule application in a sandbox, staging, production environment. In Anypoint platform, we have many environment, and here if you look at the screen, this is a sandbox environment. If I wanted to deploy, then I can click the deploy option, where I can browse the jar to deploy the component. And it's not only for the cloud up deployment, and even you can do your on-premise deployment from this Runtime Manager. See here, whether your apps are deployed in the cloud or on premises, you can manage it from Anypoint platform Runtime Manager. So what is Runtime Manager? Runtime Manager is an interface to your Anypoint platform that provides a unified view of all your application and servers, and also APIs. I'll move on to the next question. And what is the difference between flow and subflow and private flow? So normally flow, right, when you create any Mule application or Mule project within a studio, so we will start by creating a flow, correct? And inside the flow only, we will have a HTTP listener or scheduler, or we will have list of event processes to handle all the processing logic. So normally if you look at the flow will have an event source. Event source is nothing but the triggering, how we trigger our Mule flow, right? So it could be your HTTP listener, or it could be a scheduler, or it could be any file listener, like a new file is updated, and those kind of things. And the same flow, you can have a exception handling also. And what is subflow? Subflow, it is in the core module, and subflow do not have a event source and also exception handling. So if you drag and copy and subflow into your canvas, right, you can see the difference. You will not have an event source, and also you will not have any error handling. And if you have a subflow within a Mule application, right, how do you call? You will use a flow reference in order to call your subflow. And what is private flow? Private flow is nothing but a flow. So you have to drag and drop your flow component, and if you don't specify any event source, then that is called as a private flow. So this particular flow, as there is no event source, it can be invoked by another flow using a flow reference. And what is flow reference? Flow reference routes the Mule event to another flow. For example, you have a flow and you wanted to call another flow. Then you can use this flow reference in order to call another flow. It executes all processes in the referenced flow. For example, you are going to call your main flow to your child flow using a flow reference. Then your child flow will be a referenced flow. Then once that activity complete all the steps in your child flow, the control will come back to your main flow in the same Mule application. So that is the difference. What is flow, subflow, and also private flow. and also we have seen what is flow reference. I'll move on to the next slide. What is authentication and authorization? For example, if you have any API, right, for example, or any platform you wanted to log in, then you need some username and password. So those kind of things, it's authentication. So it's not only username password authentication, it could be your OAuth based authentication as well. For example, I wanted to log into my Anypoint platform, then I will supply my username and password, right? So that is called authentication. And what is authorization? It occurs after successful authentication. And authorization, it determines what user cannot access. For example, I have logged into my Anypoint platform, and after that what page I can have the access, right? For example, as a support analyst, I should have only the option to see Anypoint monitoring or monitoring related component. I'm not supposed to have the access for anything related to VPC or anything specific to infrastructure related component. So that is what it will determine authorization. Authorization is the one, once you logged in, what are the things you can access. So that will come into authorization, and before logging into the platform itself, we are supposed to log into that particular platform or not, right? So that will come into authentication part. So authentication determines whether the users are who they are claimed to be. For example, if the user is a valid user, that is the one, it will try to validate it, and if it is a valid user, it will allow us to access to that particular platform. Example, for authentication, employees in a company are required to authenticate through a network before accessing company email. So for example, company email we have, and I wanted to access a company email. So I'm an employee, I wanted to access a company email, then we need to pass some username and password, right? So that is called authentication. And what is authorization? After the authentication only authorization will happen. So I have logged into that platform, which is a mail application, and after an employee successfully authenticates, the system determines what information the employees are allowed to access. Once I logged into the email, what kind of system or what kind of things I can have the access. Should I have the access to my calendar, or I am supposed to have access for some specific pages. So those kind of things within a mail application, what are the things I can access, that will come under authorization. So because in Mulesoft we have many APIs, and API also will allow authentication, right? And similarly we will have authorization also. So we need to understand what is the difference between authentication and also authorization. I'll move on to the next slide. What is API kit router? API kit router element allows you to define an API. For example, you are going to create an API in your Anypoint platform. So you logged into Anypoint platform. There you have an API designer where you can create your API. Basically, you can create your API specification there. Like you can use a RAML or a YAML in order to create your API specification. Once the API specification is ready, then with that you can generate the flow. So for example, you have a API and API specification which created an API designer. So now that API specification is stored in a RAML format. Now you have the RAML format. You can come to your Anypoint Studio and you can use the RAML specification in order to create a Mule application project. Then what will happen? It will create automatically. It will generate the interface for you, which will, based on the specification information, what are the method we have specified, what are the input parameter we have specified, what are the service signature we have specified. Based on all those kind of information, it will generate the empty flow for us. So that is what it will do, and it helps developers to generate whole code from the API specification itself. So we don't need to develop anything from the scratch. So with API specification itself, it will automatically build all the scaffolding for us. And in addition to that, what it will do, other than generating a flows from the API specification, it also helps in routing the incoming request to specific flows in the API. For example, when there is a request coming to our interface and we have a API router, and when the request received here, we might have received the request for get method or post method or different method. So this API router, which will help us to route to that particular method after specific validation. Whatever the validation we have mentioned in our API specification, right? It will try to validate everything. So once everything, all the validation is success, then it will allow us to talk to the appropriate method. So this API router, it will help to validate our incoming request, and also it will help us to route to specific method. So that is what this API kit router will do. And similarly, we with the YAML file, we can have a API kit router for handling the REST based request. Similarly, if you wanted to handle the SOAP based request, then you can use a WSDL file in order to create your API kit routing for SOAP. Moving on to the next one, what is object store? Object store is a connector, is a Mule component. So in a Mule Anypoint Studio, you will have a lot of connectors. With that, we can connect to that resource. So one of the connector is object store connector. This is mainly allows for simple key value storage. So what is the functionality of object store? So you wanted to store something into your object store. For example, I have a key value pair. I have a key with some value. I wanted to store it, and I wanted to refer that particular key and value later. So in that case, what we can do is we can store that particular key into our object store. For example, I have a key like my last process time, and I have some time value. So that is my value. Last process time is a key, and value is what was the time I have last processed. So that data and time, that will go to the value field. So that I'll store in an object store. Then later, when my interface run next time, I wanted to refer what was the last process time I have processed from my database. So that value, it is already there in my object store within the specific key called last process time. I'll use that and I'll take the value. So this way, right, this is mainly used in case of storing synchronization information. For example, I wanted to synchronize some data from system A to B. So first time when my schedule runs, I have processed with some 1000 data, and next run I have to process it from 1001. So I need to know up to how much I have processed, right? So that particular 1000 value, I wanted to store it in my object store. So I'll put like last process ID, then I'll put 1000 into my object store. So next time when the application runs, it will refer that value. When what was the last process ID, it will say 1000. Then I'll try to process the records after 1000. So this way we can use object store in order to store such key value information such as watermark. So whatever the scenario I explained, watermark, which will help us to identify what was the last processed information. And similarly, storing temporal information such as access token. For example, you are invoking some APIs. Assume you are invoking a Salesforce API which has a OAuth authentication. In the OAuth authentication, the token will expire every few hours. If after that we need to reset the token. So after resetting the token value, it will be available, or we can use it for another few hours. So instead of every time whenever we call the actual web service, every time in order to call the token service and then the actual service, what we can do is we can call the first time the token service. The next time onwards, once the token is, we have taken the token value, we can put it into our object store. Next time, instead of accessing or instead of invoking the actual service to retrieve the token, we can take the latest token from our object store itself. In this way, we can reduce the number of calls which we are making to the downstream system in order to call the token service. Okay, so these are the different use cases where we can use object store. So object store, it's mainly to store some information with key value pair. For example, I wanted to store some key with again some value, then we can store it so that we can refer that value key later point of time in order to retrieve that value. I'll move on to the next slide. What is endpoint URL? So Mulesoft, it's mainly we have API-led connectivity. Most of the interfaces we create as a API. So how do we call the API? So API will have a endpoint. So that will be represented as a endpoint URL. An API endpoint is a URL for a service. For example, I have a service called order service. I have a get member service, or I have some get pack service, or those kind of service. It's a API, and I wanted to access that service. Then you will have a host name / and your endpoint details will be there, like order service or customer service. So those kind of service will be there. That's your API endpoint. For example, API endpoint indicates how you access the resource. For example, I want to access the employee information. Then I will have a host name slash and then I will have my endpoint details. For example, in this below example, this is a host name. dummy.restapexample.com is a host name. And after that you have API slash v1 slash employees. This is the resource. So when I access this resource with the get method, it will give all the employee details from that particular interface. So what is endpoint? Endpoint is the URL of the URL for a service. So that is what it's an endpoint URL. I'll move on to the next slide. What is VM? So VM also it's a connector. So this mainly used for managing intra-app and inter-app communication through either transient or persistent asynchronous queues. For example, you have a use case where you need to send some data to another system in an asynchronous manner, or you wanted to send it in a sequential way where you wanted to put it into some queue and from there you wanted to process it. Then what we can do is we can use VM in order to send the data via queue. So when we send the data via queue, you have two options. One is a persistent queue where the data will get stored in memory. After the restart, the whatever the stored value, right, or whatever when the system get crashed, we will be losing the message. And if there is a persistent queue, even the system is crashing, the data will be persistent somewhere in the disk, so that it will be, even though after the restart you will have a message which we can retrieve it and we can process it to downstream system. And so mainly transient queue, it is faster and it's not reliable, and persistent queues are slower and it's reliable. Because it's slower because we are storing the data in some disk as well, because when we wanted to subscribe it again, then we will be taking it from the disk. So that's why even though crash, we are having actual data, so that's why we are saying it's reliable. And use VM connector when you want to pass the message from one flow to another through queuing mechanism. For example, you have a flow A and you have a flow B, and what are the different ways you can invoke a flow B from flow A? You can use flow reference also, right? But if you use VM connector, then you can publish the message to queue, and you can asynchronously you can subscribe as well. So this way you can use some queuing in between in order to push the data to another application or another flow. And distribute work across cluster. For example, you have on-premise instance where you have a clustering. For example, you have two on-premise instance where your application is running, and when you publish the data from your app, and if you have a VM subscriber, then what will happen? Any one of the app will subscribe the data. This way you can load balance the information, and this way you can share your load across the cluster. And next one is communicate with different apps that are running in a same Mule domain. For example, in on-premise environment only we will have a Mule domain concept. In on-premise environment you have a Mule domain where you have many application, and inside many application you wanted to share a data. For example, you have a application 1 and you have application 2. For application 1 is publishing some data. From application 2 I wanted to subscribe the same data. Then you can if you wanted to communicate with different apps, right, then you can use VM queue in between, so that you can publish it from app 1 and subscribe it from app 2, and perform simple queuing, and which does not justify to use a full JMS broker. So you have a JMS broker concept also, where you can use publish subscribe, where you will have a lot of admin management capabilities as well, which is we can use some external MQ capabilities like Solace, or you have other MQ provider as well, like Active MQ and so on. But if you don't want to go with that, then you want a simple queuing mechanism, then you can go with VM connector itself. I'll move on to the next question. What is the difference between web service consumer and HTTP request? So normally this web service consumer, right, we will use it for SOAP. Normally the web service consumer, you will have a option as a method like consume, where you can configure your SOAP endpoint details, service details, and also the operation detail. And once you configure it, then you will be able to map the relevant input from the transform message. But before after the transform message, we need to use web service consume in order to call the actual SOAP endpoint. So web service consumer, it's mainly for the SOAP based web service. If you wanted to call or consume SOAP based web service from your Mule flow, then we will use web service consumer. What is HTTP request? And in web service, other than SOAP based web service, you have one more thing called REST based web service or HTTP web service. If you wanted to consume those kind of web services, then you can use HTTP request. So when you call HTTP request, you will have a URL which you can consume it, and when you call any URL, you can say what is that method. Is it a get method or post method? And then if it's a post method, do you need to pass any payload, right? So that you can pass it in a body. In addition to that, if you have anything like you have something like headers, you need to pass it additionally. So those kind of information you can pass it in a while calling the particular HTTP URL or a REST URL. You can call those kind of you can pass those kind of inputs while invoking those particular web service. So if it's a HTTP based web service or REST based web service, you can use HTTP request. If it's a SOAP based web service, you can use web service consumer. I'll move on to the last question. What is rate limiting and throttling? When you go to API manager in Anypoint platform, you can manage your API and you can govern API. So when you say govern API, you can secure your API. For example, you can apply some policy to secure your API. For example, rate limiting policy limits number of requests an API can accept within a window of time. For example, I have a order API. There is a order request is coming from the different channel, and my backend can accept only specific volume at a time. For example, I can accept maximum 1000 requests per second. Then I'll specify that in my rate limiting policy. If more than 1000 requests are coming, for example, I am receiving a 10,000 requests per second, which I cannot handle it at all at my backend. So then what I can do, I can reject that request which exceed the limit. In that case, I can use rate limiting policy. Maybe somebody wants to hack our system and they can fire so many requests within a small window of time also. So in that way, we wanted to secure our API. In that case, you can apply some rate limiting policy as well. And throttling. So what is this throttling is? For example, it's similar to rate limiting, but a request exceed the limit for possible processing in a subsequent window. For example, I am receiving a 10,000 requests, but my throttling says after 1000 requests, it will queue the data. So in the first case, it will ignore the request. The second case, it will queue the data, and then it's in subsequent window, right? After 1 second, there is no request is coming. Then it will take the another 1000 and it will try to process. So how many records I wanted to process, and between each set, and what is the interval I need to keep it in between, those kind of things you can configure it in a throttling policy. So in Mule world, in throttling you can achieve it through this spike control policy, and rate limiting you can achieve through rate limiting policy. Inside rate limiting also you have a rate limiting SLA based policy. So in that you can apply the concept called rate limiting. Throttling you can apply using spike control policy. This way, when there is a spike, you will process a first set of requests in specific window, and after that you will queue the data, and subsequent window you will process the remaining request. And you have a lot of requests, and still you cannot process even though you queue the data. After specific timeout, you can ignore the data which you don't want to process as well. That is also you can do it in a spike control policy. Yeah, that's it for today. Thank you. Hi, thank you for watching this video so far. If you like the video, please share it with your friends and also subscribe to this Tech Lightning channel. Thank you. Bye-bye.